Please stay tuned after this video for a preview from our latest video from our new channel, Paranormally Listed. The video is about killers who are haunted by the spirits of their victims. Before we start today's video, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Hunt a Killer. I think Hunt a Killer is one of the most fascinating subscription services on the planet. Every month they send you a box that is essentially an escape room in a box. It is full of evidence, puzzles, and codes that you need to decipher to solve the murder. It's the perfect gift for a true crime fanatic. If you happen to be the true crime junkie in your life, make sure you ask for a subscription from your friends and family. This current season of Hunt a Killer is absolutely fascinating. A resident of the island town Mallory Rock, Maine, named Beth Ferris Hendricks, has tragically died. Her death was ruled an accident, but Beth's sister, Gwen, knows that her death wasn't an accident. She is convinced that Beth was murdered, and she wants to prove it. Now, she has to investigate the people she's known her entire life. You need to help Gwen uncover the secrets of the New England island and bring the killer to justice. It's an awesome storyline that reminds me of a Stephen King or Dennis Lehane novel, but I get to be involved and help solve the mystery. Hunt a Killer has insanely good props that seem like they're from the set of a movie or television show. Also, if you don't feel like committing to a subscription, you can buy whole seasons of Hunt a Killer. But make sure you get your orders in by December 15th if you want to receive it by Christmas. Hunt a Killer has a great deal for Criminally Listed viewers. Right now, you can go to huntakiller.com/criminallylisted and use the promo code CriminallyListed for $10 off your purchase. Once again, make sure you use the promo code CriminallyListed for a $10 discount. Do you have what it takes to hunt a killer? Number 3. George Stevenson, George Daly, and John Daly. In the 1920s, Joe Cleaver founded a publishing company, Cleaver Hume Press, in London, England. He was successful, and he and his wife ran in London's elite social circles. Joe and Hilda first met when they were 15 years old. They got married in 1928 after being engaged for 9 years. One of Joe's dreams was to own a country house in the Fordingbridge, Hampshire area. He first fell in love with the area when he and Hilda would go fishing there in the early days of their marriage. Joe ended up building a house in the area. They called the house Brigade House. Joe and Hilda had 2 sons whom they raised in the house. Their sons moved out, and Joe and Hilda grew old together in their dream house. At the end of summer 1986, Joe and Hilda were both 82 years old. Hilda was disabled, so they had to live and nurse 70-year-old Margaret Murphy. On the morning of September 2nd, 1986, the cleaner and the gardener arrived at the house. They found the house filled with smoke. They looked around, and in a bedroom, they found the dead body of a woman. It was the daughter-in-law of the Cleavers, 46-year-old Wendy Cleaver. Wendy was married to Joe and Hilda's son, Thomas Cleaver. The gardener and the cleaner tried to get into the master bedroom, but it was too hot. They went to phone for help, but they realized the phone line had been cut. So they got into a car and drove to the police station. In the master bedroom, the fire department found the charred remains of 82-year-old Joe and 82-year-old Hilda, their 47-year-old son Thomas, and 7-year-old Margaret Murphy, the live-in nurse. They all had been bound, doused with gas, and set on fire. They were all alive when they were set on fire. It turned out that the fire had been contained to the master bedroom because concrete had been added to support the wooden beams. 47-year-old Wendy Cleaver had been raped and strangled to death with a piece of black ribbon. The police looked around and noted several things had been stolen. This included a TV, a video recorder, 5 guns, and ammunition. Also, about 90 pounds had been stolen. But the thieves missed 700 pounds hidden in Thomas's artificial leg. Thomas had lost his leg years earlier in a car crash. Pictures and paintings in the house were skewed, which suggested that someone was looking for a hidden safe. During their investigation, the police learned that Joe had fired a handyman, 35-year-old George Stevenson, about 4 weeks earlier. George had fired Stevenson because he was a drunk who beat his wife, who also worked at the home. Stevenson had a criminal record for burglary, fraud, and assaulting a police officer. The police went to interview George, and they discovered he was gone. He quickly became the most wanted man in England. During the manhunt, the police learned that he had rented a car on the day of the murders. 25-year-old George Daly had paid the deposit for the car. So the police arrested George Daly and his 21-year-old brother, John Daly. Stevenson surrendered 2 days after the bodies were found. He claimed he was innocent. He said he merely drove the Daly brothers to and from the Cleavers' home, and he had no idea they had murdered anyone. George Daly denied being involved in the home invasion and mass murder. But John Daly was ready to talk. John explained that Stevenson knew that the Cleavers had guns. He wanted to steal them to use in a future armed robbery. Stevenson knew that the Cleavers kept a key hidden under the front porch. He got the key and they entered the home. They were armed with pickaxe handles. When they broke in, the family was sitting down for dinner. They were led upstairs and they were all bound. The three men searched the house for the guns and a safe, but they could not find the safe. The three men pulled Wendy into another bedroom and they took turns raping her. John said he went last. Stevenson came into his room and on a table he placed a knife and a length of ribbon. John said that he understood that Stevenson wanted him to kill Wendy. So he put her on her stomach and wrapped a cloth around her neck. He strangled her until she stopped breathing. Afterwards, Stevenson told George Daly that the other four were dead and he had poured gasoline on them. He told George to throw a lighter in the room. John said that his brother threw the lighter in because he thought that they were all dead. They wanted the entire house to burn down to hide any evidence that they had been there. George Stevenson, George Daly, and John Daly went to trial in October 1987. After a 3-week trial, George Stevenson was found guilty of 4 murders. He was acquitted of killing Wendy. He was given 6 life sentences. He had to serve a minimum of 25 years before applying for parole. John Daly was found guilty of all 5 murders and he was given 7 life sentences. His brother, George Daly, was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. In 2001, it was ordered that George Stevenson wouldn't be able to apply for parole after 35 years. In 2010, George Daly was released after serving his 22-year sentence. In March 2021, after serving 33 years, George Stevenson applied for parole. If he's granted parole, he'll be released in 2023. However, he'll be on a perpetual life license. That means if he does anything wrong, he'll immediately be sent back to prison. At the time of this video, George Stevenson is 70 years old and he is still in prison. George Daly is 60 years old and his current whereabouts are unknown. John Daly is 56 years old and it's believed that he is still in prison. After the brutal mass murder, no one wanted to buy Brigade House and it was eventually demolished. Number 2. Carl Brown. Carl Robert Brown was born in Chicago, Illinois in November 1930. In the 1950s, he married a woman named Nancy Worthington. Nancy gave birth to 2 daughters, Susan and Anita. Carl was an ambitious man. He taught social studies at Hialeah Junior High School in Miami, Florida, but he felt like he didn't make enough money. He managed to purchase a group of low-rent apartments. He also taught business classes at the local college at night. In 1969, Carl and Nancy got divorced. Nancy wanted to get her PhD, and Carl disapproved. A couple years later, Carl got married to a woman named Sylvia. Sylvia gave birth to a son, Andy. But the marriage didn't even last 3 years. Carl said that Sylvia wasn't committed to their home life. Sylvia said that Carl was mentally ill and he refused to get help. Many other people thought that Carl's personality had changed over the years. In the 1970s, many of his friends and co-workers would avoid him. For example, when he came into the staff room at school, other staff members left. When he talked to people, he ranted about politics and his anti-communist beliefs. Adults weren't the only ones to notice that Carl's behavior was becoming more erratic. Often, when he would talk to his students, he'd change the subject in the middle of the sentence. Carl's 2 daughters tried to have him committed to a psychiatric hospital. He ended up disowning them. In the summer of 1981, Carl was transferred to Drew Middle School, which is also in Miami. His behavior became even more erratic. In March 1982, Carl was relieved of his teaching duties and he was sent for psychological treatment. During his sessions with a psychiatrist, he acted calmly. The psychiatrist thought that his rants were just the ramblings of a confused mind. He also didn't think that Carl was dangerous. But when Carl asked to go back to work, his request was denied. Neighbors thought that Carl was quiet but eccentric. People usually saw him riding his bike around the neighborhood, collecting cans. On August 19, 1982, Carl went to Moore's Welding and Machine Services Incorporated. He wanted a lawnmower motor repaired to use it on his bike. The bill for the repair was $20. Carl started yelling at the business owner, Bob Moore, because he felt that shoddy work had been done on the engine. He was also unhappy that his traveler's check would not be accepted as payment. He then started incoherently ranting. What people in the shop did make out was that he said that Russia was the best country and he hated America. He said he was going to come back and kill all the Americans. He then left the shop. Moore and his employees just thought that Carl was a loud but harmless lunatic. Later that day, Carl took his 10-year-old son, Andy, to a gun store near his house. Carl purchased 2 shotguns and a rifle. The next morning, Carl got onto his bike. He told Andy he was going to kill a lot of people and asked him if he wanted to come. He said he was going to end up at Hialeah Junior High School, where he formerly worked. Andy refused to go. Carl set off on his bike with a shotgun slung over his shoulder. Around 11 a.m., Carl arrived at Moore's Welding and Machine Services Incorporated. He entered a side door and walked into their office. He said he was going to send them back to Germany. He first killed the manager, 47-year-old Carl Lee. Then he killed the bookkeeper, 78-year-old Mangum Moore. He then shot to death the 2 secretaries, 29-year-old Martha Steelman and 67-year-old Ernestine Moore. The shop owner, Bob Moore, was not in the shop at the time of the shooting. Ernestine was his mother and Mangum was his uncle. 53-year-old crane operator Lonnie Jeffries happened to be in the office and he was shot as well. Jeffries died from his wounds. Carl then entered the machine shop. He shot 42-year-old machinist Carl Vanquist Sr. and his 17-year-old son, Carlos Vanquist Jr., who helped at the shop. Carl also shot 30-year-old Eduardo Lima, a machinist. All 3 men survived. He then turned the gun on 38-year-old Juan Ramon Trepasquios and killed him. Once he shot everyone in the machine room, he went to the welding room. He found 44-year-old Pedro Vasquez hiding, and he shot him dead. 46-year-old welder Nelson Barrios tried to run, and Carl Brown shot him in the parking lot. Carl then got on his bike and calmly rode away. People at neighboring businesses heard the gunshots. Ernest Hammond, who worked at a business across the road, ran after Carl as he rode away. Hammond then stopped at a shop that was owned by Mike Cram. Hammond told Cram that a man on a bike shot up Bob Moore's shop. Hammond and Cram got into Cram's 1981 Lincoln Continental and pursued Carl. 5 blocks later, they came across him. Hammond aimed a gun at him and tried to fire a warning shot. The bullet hit Carl in the back, but he didn't act like he had been wounded. He started to reach for his gun to shoot back, so Cram hit Carl with his car. Carl and his bike slammed into a cement utility pole, and he flew off his bike and stopped moving. Cram and Hammond stopped and were able to flag down a police officer. The police officer checked, and 51-year-old Carl Brown was dead. It turned out that the bullet hit Brown in the heart, and he died from the gunshot and not from the crash. Brown's murder spree, sparked over a $20 bill, left 8 people dead and 3 people injured. It was called Miami's worst mass murder. Mike Cram and Ernest Hammond were not charged with killing Carl. The authorities believe that their actions possibly saved more lives. Number 1. Patrick Purdy. Patrick Purdy was born in November 1964 to Benjamin Purdy and Kathleen Toscano in Tacoma, Washington. Benjamin was a staff sergeant in the Army. When Patrick was 2, Benjamin threatened Kathleen with a weapon, so she divorced him. Kathleen and Patrick ended up settling in Stockton, California. Patrick attended Cleveland Elementary School in Stockton, California from kindergarten until the 2nd grade. Growing up, Patrick had mental health issues and he looked for ways to cope. He eventually turned to alcohol. By the time he was 14, he was an alcoholic. When he was 14, he was kicked out of his home after a violent fight with his mother. For a while, he lived on the streets of San Francisco, California. He was eventually put into a foster home and he was adopted. But by then, he was addicted to drugs. It wasn't long before he started committing crimes. Between 1980 and 1987, he developed a long criminal record, which included marijuana possession, prostitution, vandalism, robbery, and receiving stolen property. In April 1987, Patrick was in the El Dorado National Forest. He was arrested for firing a semi-automatic pistol. All the crimes were minor, so he never did much time in jail. But when he was in jail, he attempted suicide twice. At some point, he was evaluated by a psychiatrist. He said that Patrick had a mild intellectual disability and he was a danger to himself. But then, in 1987, Patrick seemed to be getting his life together. He started taking welding classes at community college. But unfortunately, it didn't last long. He left California and started drifting. He ended up in Oregon, where he lived with his aunt and uncle. While living in Oregon, he purchased a Chinese-made AK-47 semi-automatic rifle at a gun shop. He could purchase the rifle because none of his convictions had barred him from gun ownership. Also, a psychiatric evaluation only said that he was a danger to himself, not others. At the end of summer 1987, Patrick left Oregon and moved back to Stockton, California. On January 17, 1989, 24-year-old Patrick Purdy armed himself with his AK-47 and 2 handguns. He drove his car towards Cleveland Elementary School, which was the school he attended from kindergarten to grade 2. He parked his car not far from the school and then set it on fire. He then walked to the school. At the time, the students in grades 1, 2, and 3 were outside for recess. Without warning, Patrick Purdy sprayed the playground with bullets using the AK-47. He fired 105 shots. The students ran for cover. Then 24-year-old Patrick Purdy pulled out a handgun and he shot himself in the head. Tragically, 6-year-old Thuy Tran, 6-year-old Sokha Man, 8-year-old Ram Chun, 8-year-old Owen Lim, and 9-year-old Rathnar Orr were all killed. An additional 30 students and a teacher were also injured. Why Patrick Purdy chose to shoot up the school is something he took to the grave with him. The police believed it may have been race-related. Most of the kids who were shot were of Vietnamese and Cambodian descent. Patrick often expressed racist views, and one time when he was arrested, he was carrying racist literature. But as to why he chose his former school instead of another location, we will probably never know. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Now here's a clip from our video, 3 Killers Haunted by Their Victims, from our new channel, Paranormally Listed. The last time April's parents saw her, she was riding her bike. About 20 minutes later, April's mother, Coral, went out to bring her home. But she couldn't find April. Coral immediately called 999, which is the emergency line in Great Britain. Officers were in the area in minutes. One girl said that she saw April talking to a man and then she got into his gray van. One notable thing that the girl said was that April got into the right side of the car. This is unusual because in most vehicles in the United Kingdom, the driver's side is on the right-hand side. She also described the man by saying he had brown hair, a beard, and blue or green eyes. He was wearing a green jacket or a jumper, jeans, and running shoes. Massive searches were conducted for April. You can watch the rest of the video by clicking on the link on the screen now. You can also find a link to the channel in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.